بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, this is our second and final day during this dawrah. And a lot of patience is required in seeking knowledge. And there's a story that I want to mention of Imam al-Sa'di with Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah. Imam al-Sa'di, he was teaching Qawaid ibn Rajab, which is a book in Qawaid Fiqhiyya by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah. And a lot of students were attending in the beginning. But by the end of the book, because the books are very, you can maybe find it in one volume, but it's a really thick book. By the end, there was only one student remaining who finished the book with Imam al-Sa'di, and it was Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah. And as a prize, at that time, in the area that they were from, and obviously they didn't have internet, Imam al-Sa'di gave Ibn Uthaymeen as a prize an apple, just an apple. And that's something Ibn Uthaymeen had not seen before at the time. But the point being is that he had patience, and he remained till the end, whilst everybody else left, and everybody else, gave up. And everyone has their own excuses. But the point being is that Ibn Uthaymeen remained till the end. And then we all know now the legacy that Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah has left behind. So sometimes it can be difficult. I know the lessons are long from Asr till after Isha, but it requires a lot of patience if you really want to learn. In Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, who was a tabi'i, he said, and it's narrated by Imam Muslim, لا يستطاع العلم براحة الجسم, that you can't attain knowledge by the relaxation of the body. Meaning, if you're relaxing and you want everything to be easy, you're never going to learn. That true knowledge is where you put in a lot of effort. And if, like we studied the documentation of hadith, we studied how some of the Salaf would travel for months just so that they can learn one hadith, or just so that they can authenticate one hadith. And another good fa'idah regarding this narration of Yahya ibn Abi Kathir is that it's mentioned by Imam Muslim, but it's mentioned under the book of Salah, under the chapter of the timings of Salah. The timings of Salah, Mawaqit as-Salah. So the ulama, when they came to explain this quote or this statement of his that you can't attain knowledge, or knowledge is not attained with the relaxation of the body, they were confused. That what has this got to do with Salah? And then Imam al-Nawawi, in his explanation, he mentions, and he's quoting, I believe, Qadi Iyad, that if you actually look at the amount of narrations, because remember we took that Imam Muslim, he brings the same hadith but different chains of narrations, and he repeats with all the different chains. Whereas Imam Bukhari will just mention it once, the part of the hadith that's needed, and move on. But Imam Muslim, he brought a number of narrations, different chains of narrations for the same hadith. Normally, if you would, it would be 2, 3, but for this, I can't remember the exact number, but maybe approximately 10. Now imagine 10 different chains of narrations, how many places did he have to travel for that? And that's for just one hadith. So when the ulama explain this statement, they say that the reason Imam Muslim, he wrote this here, is to show to the people that these 10 narrations that I've got for you, that are easily found on one page now, this is not something that I just got overnight. I had to put a lot of effort into researching, into memorizing, into traveling and so on, so that I can attain this knowledge. And now we know the status of Imam Muslim in the religion of Islam. So likewise, we have to put in a lot of effort. And in Medina, there's a Shaykh, he's from Riyadh, his name is Shaykh Saleh Al-Uthaymeen. Shaykh Saleh Al-Uthaymeen. Now, he's from Riyadh, but every year, annually, in Medina, during the winter break, he has a dawrah. And that dawrah is 8 days, and he goes through 15 books. And the timing is after Fajr, starts from Fajr for about 4 hours, after Fajr till about 10 a.m. And then there's a little break, and then again from Asr all the way until about 2 hours after Isha. So, today we're doing something similar. We're not doing the Fajr part, but we're doing the Asr till after Isha. And if you can't do exactly like the Shaykh, then we could try to emulate at least part of him. Alhamdulillah, as that, I remember when I attended in my last year of Medina, I think there were about 6,000 students that attended. and that, not just Arabs, people from England that had come, people from different countries had come to study from the Sheikh. And it wasn't like, the Sheikh's very technical. So you know how we're doing the Usool al-Fiqh? Like his lessons are like that. So it's not just a nice reminder conference, you can listen, it's just actual, you have to write. And literally the Sheikh, because he's so technical, and he's very precise in his wording, you have to try to write nearly every word that he says. So there's no stop, there's no worksheets giving out. There's the book, text, and then there's on the side there's some space for you to write, but you have to write yourself. So inshallah, that's just a reminder for us for the rest of the day, inshallah. Is that this, it can get difficult, but we have to have patience so that we can gain this knowledge. And also another point is that we do actually have a lot of the book left. I was actually looking at how many chapters we have left, and we have a lot of chapters to go through and a lot of points to go through. And I'll try to finish the book if I can. But the main objective that I want from you right now is that if we are not able to go through some of the detailed issues which are mentioned into this book due to the time, then the minimum what I want is for you to understand the concepts which are mentioned. So if we say nasakh, abrogation, at least understand what that is and some of the main conditions and rulings regarding it. Likewise, aam and khas, or mutlaq, muqayyid, what's the difference between aam and mutlaq, things like that. As for the details, then we can, maybe if I teach this book again and we have more time, or whatever the case may be, then we can go through it in a bit more detail. But right now, because it's a dawrah, and that's how dawrahs generally are. Dawrahs are generally sometimes the objective is not for you to know every single detail, but it's just, if you've never studied the book before, and Shaykh he mentions this, in the beginning of his dawrah as well, is that if you've never studied the book before, then the aim of the dawrah is to make you familiar with the concepts. And if you are like an intermediate level, then you are, you're learning not being familiar, but actually learning most of the rulings. And if you've studied before, then you are just cementing your knowledge. Okay, so that's the benefit of dawrat. But dawrat are better than nothing. But obviously, if you want true knowledge, then what's better than dawrat is studying on a day-to-day basis, every single day, taking it slowly and revising and being tested and so on. So, for example, one thing I normally do in my lessons is the beginning of every lecture, I test my students on the previous lesson. But I've not done this with you because we don't have time to do that. And there have been times where if the students failed, I just said no lesson and that's it. I said, right, tomorrow we'll have the lesson tomorrow instead. But obviously I've not done that with you. And I don't think you'd be happy that you brought me from England just for me to say no lesson today. So
that would have been better, but still this is good.
Alhamdulillah. Right, okay, we will continue from where we left off yesterday. We were still under the chapter of Al-Kalam, which is regarding speech. And we looked at speech from different ways. We looked at it from the word itself, from the Arabic language, and we said there were 3 types, ism, fi'l and harf. Then we talked about it from the angle of what type of speech can you say is truthful or a lie, and to that which you can't. في الثالث فين؟ He's not here. And now we are going to talk about the last point in the chapter of Al-Kalam, which is regarding, it's called Al-Haqiqa, Al-Haqiqatu wal-Majaz. Al-Haqiqa wal-Majaz. Al-Haqiqa, they've translated here as the truth, and Al-Majaz is a metaphor. In simple terms, Al-Haqiqa is basically you could say maybe the apparent meaning. Okay? The apparent main meaning. We're going to explain exactly what it is. And a metaphor is a meaning where it's not the apparent meaning, but it's like it's another meaning which is intended. It's another meaning which is intended. So even though you use a certain word, you don't literally mean that word, you mean something else. Okay? And we will get to the examples and you will understand it, inshallah. So, and this divide, or this splitting into haqiqa wal majaz, this is splitting speech in terms of its usage. Because when you use words, you're either using it as its literal meaning, or using it as a metaphor. I mean, I can give you an example in English. if you would say to somebody, for example, get lost, yeah? Does that literally mean going to a jungle so that you don't know where you are? No, it just means just go away from me, yeah? So you don't take the literal meaning. So that's what we are talking about over here. And again, it's very important to know this because we need to determine if an ayah or hadith, is it the literal meaning or is it a metaphor? And if it is, what are the conditions? And are there metaphors in the Quran or are there not? And so on. We will discuss all of this, inshallah. So the first, the Shaykh, he says on top of page 24, the last sentence of 23, he says, speech is divided in terms of usage to reality, i.e. haqiqah, and metaphor, which is majaz. So the first is the reality or the truth. Just on the next page. Number one, reality or haqiqah. I'll probably use the word haqiqah because, that's you should know this Arabic term. Especially in Usool al-Fiqh, you should know the Arabic terms because it's very difficult to translate into one word. So haqiqah, the Shaykh, he gives his definition. He says, it is the word used for the meaning it has been placed for. Okay? It is the word which is used for the meaning it has been placed for. Such as the lion for a predatory animal. If I say lion, everyone thinks of the animal, right? So that's if I say I saw a lion today, and you all think of that, that's haqiqah. Okay, and that's the foundation. When you speak, what the word that you use, that's the meaning that you mean. Okay, so that's and this example of the Shaykh is quite important because just so you understand now, the Arabs sometimes would say, رَأَيْتُ الْأَسَدَ يَخْطُبُ. I saw a lion giving a khutbah. Right. What does that mean? Does that mean you literally saw the animal? No, you meant he saw a courageous man, and so on. So it's referring to a man, but he's used a lion because of his characteristics, because of how fierce and how brave and how courageous that man may be. So that example, I saw a lion giving a khutbah, that would come under the second. That would come under the second, which is called majaz. Very good. Now, then the Shaykh explains this definition and he says, so what is excluded, and by the way, this is one reason why we've chosen Ibn Uthaymeen's book, that Ibn Uthaymeen, it's really easy that even when he mentions certain points, if you were to go back to maybe the older books, okay, they would just mention the definition and then they would move on to the next point. But Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, look, he's explaining the definition, he's explaining the words in there, and so on. So that's one of the benefits of Ibn Uthaymeen's books is that they are a lot easier than others to understand. So he says, what is excluded from our statement used for is something which is neglected. That is not called reality or a metaphor. Basically, the Shaykh saying that sometimes when you use a certain word and the actual meaning of that word is neglected, or they say mahjur, nobody uses that meaning anymore. So even though the original meaning is that, nobody uses that meaning anymore. So when you say that word, nobody thinks of the original meaning, what's found in, like English, some of the words are from Latin and some of the words, nobody thinks of those meanings anymore. So those types of meanings, we're not referring to that. We're only referring to those words which are used. Those words which are used. And he says, and what is also excluded from our statement, placed for, is the metaphor. Meaning, so because the metaphor is used, the word is used for a meaning which it has not been placed for. Meaning the original meaning that was given, that's not used. It's used for a newer or a different meaning. And the examples will come and you will understand that, inshallah. Now, he says he's going to split haqiqah into three types.
What is the Arabic word for metaphor?
Majaz. Now, the Shaykh is going to split haqiqah into three types. Okay, I'll say them in Arabic quickly. The first is haqiqah lughawiyah, which means linguistically, so a linguistic reality. And the second is haqiqah urfiyah, which is a customary reality, the urf, the customs of the people. Urfiyah. And the third is shar'iyah, haqiqah shar'iyah, i.e. the Islamic reality or the legislated reality. Customary. the customs of the people. Okay. So the first one, the Shaykh mentions linguistically. So let's read what he says. The Shaykh, he says, reality is divided, haqiqah is divided into three sections: linguistic, legal in the Sharia, and customary. So the Shaykh is mentioning here. So linguistic is haqiqah lughawiyah, legal in the Sharia or Islamic haqiqah shar'iyyah, and customary haqiqah urfiyah. So these are the three. So he's going to go through the three, and if you want, before each paragraph you can number them. So before linguistically, put number 1, and then before the second, put number 2, so that when you look at it, you can clearly tell what number 1 is, what number 2 is, what number 3 is. Sometimes putting little numbers or anything like that in the book, it helps sometimes. So linguistically, this is quite straightforward, but let's read it. Linguistically refers to a word used for the meaning it has been given in the language. Okay, what we mean here, Arabic language. Whenever we say language, Arabic language. And what is excluded from the word linguistically is the legal and customary. Okay. For example, the prayer salah linguistically means supplication. When you say salah, Islamically, salah is a concept, Allahu Akbar, the actions that we do, right? But linguistically, the actual meaning of salah is ad-du'a. It means dua, it means supplication. And there's sometimes ayat in the Quran where it says وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ and so on. Or others, sometimes the meaning can be used to mean dua. But the point being is, what is the actual meaning of salah? The linguistic meaning of salah, the linguistic meaning of salah is ad-du'a, which is supplication. Now, so that's an example of linguistic. Then the second, its legal reality is the meaning given to it by the Sharia. So when you say legal, we mean the Islamic meaning basically. And so what is excluded from our statement by the Sharia is customary or linguistic reality. An example of that is the prayer. Its legal reality is words and deeds that begin with the takbir and end with the taslim. So this is what the people of the legislation place on this word. So he gave the Islamic meaning of salah, and he gave a definition which is it's words and actions that are done that starts with the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, ends with taslim, Assalamu alaikum. Okay, and everyone knows what salah is. So that is known as the Islamic or haqiqah shar'iyyah, the Islamic reality or the legal reality, legal in the religion of Islam. Right now I just need you to understand what each of these words mean, and then afterwards we can talk about, okay, which one do we use, which one don't we use, and which one's given preference, and so on. And the last one is haqiqah urfiyah. The customary reality is a word used for the meaning placed on it by the customs of the people. So it's not an Islamic concept generally, or it's not the linguistic meaning, but it's something that the people have used. When the people use this word, that's what they mean. So what is excluded from our statement custom is the linguistic and legislative reality. For example, ad-dabba. Now the Arabic word dabba, its reality in the traditional sense is that of a four-legged animal. So that is the meaning that is carried out in the customs of the people. The word dabba is basically, linguistically it refers to anything which treads upon the earth. Okay, so humans enter into that. Okay, however, when the people use the word dabba in Arabic, it's normally referring to animals. Okay, or in other words, it's referring to those which have 4 legs. It's referring to those which have 4 legs. So even though if you saw a human walking, you could say I saw a dabba linguistically. However, you wouldn't say that because the people never use that. The people don't use that meaning. Okay, so if you said you saw a person and you said dabba, many people will probably turn around and say, that's why you're calling him an animal basically. Okay, because the people don't use that meaning anymore. Maybe another example is the word halib. Halib in the Quran, the word laban. Laban in the Quran means milk, yeah? It means milk. But laban now is referring to what in Arabic? It's used more for yogurt. Yogurt, right? In Kuwait as well, yeah? Okay. As for milk, they call that halib. So you can see that here there's an Islamic meaning, or or maybe linguistic, and then there's the haqiqah urfiyah. So you wouldn't, if you go to the shop and you say, give me laban, thinking of the ayah in the Quran, okay, and you get you get yogurt, then you can't turn around and say, oh, I meant it. No, because the people, everyone in the Arab countries, they use the word laban to mean yogurt. So that's the point that's being made, is that the word kind of each word to its correct meaning in the way it is used. So meaning, if you come across an ayah or a hadith and so on, which meaning do we use? Okay, do we use the linguistic meaning, the urfi meaning, or the shar'i meaning? So in the use of the linguistics, it is linguistic reality. So if you are, let's say, reading a Arabic dictionary, okay, or an Arabic grammar book or something like that, and the word came, which meaning do you think they would be intending? The linguistic meaning, okay? And in the legislation, it's legislative reality. So if you saw, if I'm talking about salah, for example, in like a khutbah, in like an Islamic context, well, am I talking about supplication or am I talking about actual salah? Actual salah, yeah? And in the use of a traditionalist, on its traditional meaning when you're talking with normal people, or in that sort of scenario, then which meaning would you use? You would use the urfi, the customary, because that's what their custom is, that's what they are used to. So you want to start speaking to people and, using the linguistic meaning, okay, you wouldn't do it. Even if you know the linguistic meaning, you wouldn't use that when you are speaking to the people. Ali radiallahu anhu said, حَدِّثُ النَّاسِ بِمَا يَعْرِفُونَ. Speak to the people with what they know. So speak to them in their language. If you don't know, let's say you come across an ayah or a word in an ayah, and you don't know, it could be shar'i meaning, or it could be linguistic meaning, or it could be the urfi meaning, then which meanings do you go to? Okay? And the ulama have mentioned that they have given it an order. The first meaning that you go to is the shar'i meaning, haqiqa shar'iyya, the Islamic or the legal meaning. Because that's the context, it's in the Quran and Sunnah. So it's Islamic context, so it's going to have that Islamic meaning to it. Shar'i meaning first, yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And then the second they say, you go to the urfi meaning, the customary meaning. However, you have to be a bit more precise. When you talk about like the Quran and Sunnah, we mean the customs of the Sahaba, the urf of the Sahaba, because the Quran was spoken to them. It was spoken to them. And then lastly, you go to the linguistic meaning. And there are some ulama that may differ in the second and third. Some ulama might give preference to the linguistic meaning sometimes. But what I've mentioned, that's what happens most of the time. So we'll just stick to that for now, inshallah. And as Ibn Uthaymeen indicated towards earlier, we are not talking about, when you say linguistic meaning, if that linguistic meaning is never used whatsoever, like if you say that word, nobody can even if you were to ask them, what's the linguistic meaning in the language, what does it mean, they don't know, then we're not talking about those type of meanings. So even, those scholars that may give preference to the linguistic meaning over the urfi meaning, then if a word comes where the linguistic meaning is no longer used at all, then, that meaning is not looked at all. So it's like there's no meaning for that. It's like you can skip over that and you move on to the next stage. So if the regards to the linguistic, we said the three order, shar'i meaning, urfi of the Sahaba, and then the linguistic meaning. Some ulama have placed, the last two they differ. So some ulama have put linguistic and then urfi last. That's a very simple issue. But the point I want to say is that when we talk about linguistic meaning, we are not referring to the linguistic meaning that is no longer used by the people. So if we have a certain word that no longer, if you were to ask the people what's its linguistic meaning, okay, what's its linguistic meaning? Nobody has a clue whatsoever. Nobody ever uses that meaning. Okay, that's the meaning where maybe they might have used centuries ago, but no one uses it now. Yeah, if that is the case, then we don't look. Then that linguistic meaning doesn't really have any weight to it. So we don't that even though there is a meaning, but because it's neglected, then it's as though it's not even there. So if we take the other opinion where the ulama say shar'i meaning, and then the linguistic meaning, and then the urfi meaning, if a word comes where the linguistic meaning is no longer used at all, then we skip that and we go through the urfi meaning. You can say common linguistic meaning, meaning something where the people know. People know. Yeah, people use.
How did they reach to this that this is a Sharia meaning? The methodology to reach that this is Sharia meaning?
Just gathering all the different texts together and realizing. So for example, whenever Allah talks about salah, or whenever the Prophet ﷺ talked about salah, in those contexts, for example, the Prophet said to a Sahabi, Sallu, pray, using the word salah. So then the Sahaba went and he did those actions. So we realize, okay, the Islamic meaning of salah is this. So there's ways of working it out. You have to look at the text, and maybe you have to gather a few texts together and so on. But there's different ways of working it out. Okay, so this is regarding al-haqiqah. This is regarding al-haqiqah. Now we can move on to al-majaz. Okay. Al-majaz, the metaphor, is a word used for other than the purpose it was intended. Okay? So this is the opposite of haqiqah. So you're using it for the opposite, or not opposite, but for other than the purpose it was intended for it to be used. For example, a lion for a brave man. So I saw a lion giving a khutbah. You mean a brave man giving a khutbah. Has the word lion been placed to mean a brave man? No, it's the meaning. What's the meaning of lion? The animal. Yeah, the animal. So you're using the word for the reason it has not been placed for, or it has not been intended to be used for. And then the Shaykh carries on, so what is excluded from our statement used are the unused words, which is neither a reality nor a metaphor. And what is not included by the words for other than the purpose it was intended is reality, meaning haqiqah. That's just the explanation of the definition, but I think it's straightforward. It is not permissible to load a word intending its metaphoric meaning, except with a correct proof that prevents the realistic meaning being intended, and it is known in the field of eloquence as qarina. The condition of using a word for its metaphorical meaning is the presence of a link between the realistic meaning and the metaphorical meaning. So the expression is correct, and this is known in the knowledge of bayan, eloquence. That's one of the subcategories of the science of balagha. Ilm al-bayan is one of the subcategories of the science of balagha, as a link. And it is either through similarity or otherwise. So if it is similarity, then it is called at-tajawuz, as in the case with the word lion for a brave man. Okay, I'll just stop here. So basically the Shaykh has basically mentioned, to summarize this, is that you are not allowed to intend by a statement that you say the majazi, you can't go to the majazi meaning, a metaphorical meaning, unless there are two conditions which are fulfilled. Unless there are two conditions which are fulfilled. You can't just turn around and say that, oh, by this sentence, I was doing majaz, I didn't mean what I said, I meant something else. Okay? You can only say that if two conditions are fulfilled. Firstly, the Shaykh says, except with a correct proof that prevents the realistic meaning being intended. So the first is that there is a correct proof which prevents the haqiqi meaning being used. And that is known as a qarina. So another way you can word this condition is that there has to be a qarina. There has to be a qarina. And what does qarina mean? A correct proof that prevents the haqiqi meaning being used. Okay? So we can just, if we stick to the same example of the lion giving a khutbah. Now, what's the dalil? The dalil is that there's no way, how is a lion going to speak? How it's not possible for a lion to give a khutbah. Okay? So that's a proof that the haqiqi meaning is not intended. It shows that there's another meaning. which is intended. That's the first condition. The second condition is that, this is the next paragraph, in the second line, is the presence of a link between the realistic meaning and the metaphorical meaning. There has to be a link. There has to be a link for that. So for example, let's say you went to somebody and he was, I don't know, let's just say that you called him a lion, but you called him a lion because he was small, for example. What's the link between a lion and being small? Lions are generally, if anything, compared to other animals, are bigger. So you can't say, oh, no, what I meant is that he was small. Or you can't say that because there's no link. So that would be incorrect for a person to say. That would be incorrect for a person to say. But if you said, what I meant by him being a lion is that he's brave and fierce, you say, oh yeah, that's correct, because then there's a link. Because a lion, normally we perceive it to be something which is brave and powerful and so on. So the second condition is that there has to be a link between them. Okay? And the types of links are many. The types of links are many, we don't want to go into them at the moment. But the Shaykh does mention two types of majaz now. Okay? Or did the Shaykh just mention one? The example that mentioned. No. Okay, so he mentions one, but this one is two types. So he says now, he does mention one of the ways that it can be linked. Or he mentions two in total. The first one is as it is either through similarity or otherwise. Similarity or otherwise. Okay, so what are these links? Like I said, there are many, but the Shaykh mentions two. The first type of link is similarity. The first type of link is similarity or otherwise, and the other, and then other than similarity. I'll mention some examples of that, inshallah. Okay, so an example of similarity is that between the two things that you are trying to do this majaz between, then there's something which is similar, or there's a characteristic, or there's a certain description which is similar between the two. So, again, if you use the same example of the lion, a lion, he has that characteristic of being fierce and powerful and so on, and that could be found in this person. So that's what the link here is being similar. As another example is when sometimes you could refer to a woman as the moon. And the similarity is, they say beauty. Because the moon at night, it can be beautiful. So likewise, a woman could be also. So if a person was to say, I saw the moon walking on the street, okay, then, and he says what I meant by moon was a woman, is that correct? In terms of, look, you shouldn't be looking. You shouldn't be looking. But in terms of linguistic, in terms of the majaz, is that majaz correct or not? It's correct because that characteristic is found in both. And the only reason I mentioned that is because it's mentioned here in the book in front of me. Okay. No, sorry. So in the first example, the similarity was courage, being brave, and in the second, it was beauty. So that is in regards to similarity. And if that is present, then that type of majaz is called at-tajawuz, or it's called isti'ara. The Shaykh mentioned both of them. At-tajawuz, isti'ara. It's meaning the word isti'ara. He's mentioned it there, borrowing, because you kind of borrowed that characteristic and applied it to this other person. As in the case with the word lion for a brave man. And if it is not similar, so this is the second type, then it is called tajawuz majaz mursal. That's the main word. Majaz mursal. So this is the second type that we are talking about now. Is that mursal. The first one is isti'ara. isti'ara. It says it there in the second to last line of that paragraph. The first isti'ara. And then in the next paragraph, on the second line, halfway through, at the end of the first line, majaz mursal. Majaz mursal. Okay? And the Shaykh's going to give a number of examples of these. So if you go to the next paragraph, he says, an example of he uses the English word, but I want to stick to the Arabic. Majaz mursal. An example of majaz mursal is to say we took care of the rain. We took care of the rain. Now, what they actually do not mean, what do they mean by they took care of the rain? This is referring to taking care of the plants and making sure that there's not too much rain on the plants or anything like that. So in reality, they actually took care of the plants. Okay? But this is called, in Arabic, as-sababiyya. Because the reason they had to take care of the plants was the rain. The reason that they had to take care of the plants was the rain. So they just used the word rain. So what's the link here? The link here is the reasoning. The link here is the reasoning. Because the reason they had to take care of the plants was due to the rain. That is the link. So this is in Arabic. Don't try to always think about it in English. It might not make much sense in English. But in Arabic, if somebody was to say, Ra'ina al-matar, we took care of the rain, then what they mean is that we took care of the plants and we cleaned everything up and all of that. Okay? So they mean the plants, al-nabat. Okay? Now, if somebody came to you and you said, look, this is majaz. This is majaz. Because even though they said the word rain, they actually mean the plants. Okay? They say to you, okay, one of the conditions, the second condition is that there has to be a link. There has to be a link. And it's not the first type of link, similarity. There's no similarity. So we say it's a second type. And the second type of link is called majaz mursal. And this is many types. And one of them is because it's the reason. The reason they had to take care of the plants is due to the rain. So then that's the link between them because it is the reason. There's another example which is similar to the reason as well, which is the next one, which may make a little bit more sense to you, inshallah. An instance of a psychological metaphor is the rain has given growth to the pastures. What's this? The wording of the Shaykh, sometimes the Arabic makes more sense to me than the English. He says, نعم al-ashab, grass. Pastures basically means grass, okay? Basically plants. Rain has given growth to the plants. The Shaykh says, so the meaning of the words in real terms is what is meant, but to attribute the growth to the rain in a metaphorical is metaphorical in use because the one who really causes growth is Allah. So it is tajawuz in attribution. Who is the one that caused the plants to grow? Allah. But is it permissible to say that the rain did it? It is because it was a means. It was a means for the grass and the plants to grow. So this is a type of majaz, which is a bit more trickier than the first. The first, which is similarity, but it's still a type of majaz. Another example in the Quran, Allah says, وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ رِزْقًا. Allah sends down from the heavens rizq, provisions. Right, there was a nice 3-course meal and everything just come from the heavens like that. No. What comes down? Rain comes down, and from the rain plants grow and then we gain food from that. So because and this is again it's a reasoning, but it's the other side of the reasoning. It's rain was the reason, and then the end product was the rizq. So Allah mentioned the end product in this ayah. So that is, upon the opinion that we're going to talk about is the majaz in the Quran or not. Upon the opinion that there is, this would be considered majaz. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Also, from the use of majaz is the addition and omission. This is other types of majaz mursal. Addition and omission, meaning that there are extra words in the sentence, or omission, or there are less words in the sentence. An example, and subhanAllah, I don't know if you realize, this is why the ulama say Usool fiqh needs to learn in Arabic. It makes a lot more sense in Arabic. But I'll try to explain it so that you understand it. Al-hazf wal-idafa, or al-ziyada. ziyada is addition, and omission is hadf, hadha fa. An example of which is a statement of Allah the Most High, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. The word the kaf, ka, has the exact same meaning as the word mithl. Okay? If I say, huwa mithl asad, he is like a lion. Huwa kal asad, he is like a lion. Same meaning. So the fact that put two together, the Shaykh says, it is said that the letter kaf is extra. So this is the extra, this is addition. Okay? But obviously there's nothing extra in the Quran, meaning extra in the sense that there's no benefit. There's obviously a benefit to it. So the Shaykh mentions, is extra for the purpose of highlighting the negation of anything like unto Allah. So it's just extra emphasis onto the meaning that there is nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he say, Laysa kamithlihi shay. If he said, Laysa mithluhu shay, in English it would be the same. There's nothing like Allah. But in Arabic, you realize that the kaf is also there. And what's the meaning of it? It's in terms of meaning, to give more emphasis. And in terms of the balagha side that we are talking about, it is majaz. Because they say it is extra. An example of a metaphor majaz by omission, I taken something out. And this we use in English. So this inshallah might be a bit more, makes more sense. Was'al al-qaryah. Ask the village. Okay, now, if I say to you, ask the village, do you go and start speaking to the walls and talk? Or do you go and speak to the people of the village? People of the village. So that's what's here. There's a word which is omitted, taken out, erased, not there, which is a hidden word, which is people. Okay? So the Shaykh says, i.e., ask the people of the village. Okay? So the word people is omitted for a metaphoric purpose, and there are numerous types of such metaphorical instances that are listed in the sciences of bayan. Okay? So these are all different types of majaz. Okay? The point being is that hopefully mainly you understand what is majaz. As for the details and each one an example, don't worry about that too much. But inshallah you understand the different types, and that majaz, when we talk about having that link, the first condition is that there has to be a proof to show that the meaning is not intended. So for example, was'al al-qaryah, it's clear that you're not going to start a conversation with the wall and so on. And the second is that there has to be a link, and the link is of two types. The link is either similarity, that's the first type, and then the second type is other types, which is called majaz mursal, and there's different types. So if you want likewise on the if you draw on the board to make it easier for you, okay, I'll draw this on the board inshallah. So you can just basically summarize what we've taken. You can basically summarize what we have taken. Very simple inshallah. And doing graphs like this, I do like to do them. It makes everything, especially revision, a lot easier. Okay? So, okay. Camera's okay? Yeah? We have al-majaz, yeah? Or even before that. It's okay. Again, I'm going to write in Arabic. I'll translate, and if you want to write in English, it's up to you. If you want to write in Arabic, you can. The title is Speech from the Angle of Its Usage. From the angle of its usage. So, we initially split it into, what are the two types? What are the two types of speech? Haqiqa and majaz. Good. So the first is al-haqiqa. And the second is al-majaz. Okay? Haqiqa, the reality, and majaz, yeah, we just explained it. Metaphor, explained it right now. And haqiqa is 3 types.
Sharia.
Okay, the first one is haqiqa shar'iyya. Urfiyya, which is the customs. And number 3 is haqiqa lughawiyya, linguistically, very good. Okay? And we also mentioned that if you want, you can do this any way you want, but if you want to put like an example under each one, that's up to you, that's all your own notes. So if you don't remember and you want to put a example, that's up to you. Okay, I'm just doing it somewhere so you understand. And if you want as well, you can also, remember we talked about if you don't know which one it is, then which one do we give preference to? So you can just put like so fi kalam al-shar', in the speech of legislation, in the Quran and Sunnah. That's very important because that's when we look in the Quran and Sunnah. If you're looking at the speech of the people, then it will be slightly different. I don't want to go into that. So for example, if you are a judge in a court, now you're dealing with the Quran, so you're dealing with the people. So if, let's say a man said, I said this to my wife, for example, which meaning do you take? Okay, that's separate, that's a different issue to this. Okay, which I don't want to go into. Right now, we'll just focus on kalam al-shar' in the speech of the legislation, i.e. the Quran and Sunnah. So the first one is what? Which meaning do we give preference to? Shari'iyya. And then number 2? Urfiyya of whom? Of the Sahaba, good. So, when you say urfiyya, we don't mean the urf of the people now. Okay? So, time of the Sahaba, because it was to them it was revealed. And lastly is lughawiyya. Okay? So I'll just say again in English for those that want English. Speech split from the angle of its usage. Haqiqa, reality, majaz, metaphor. Reality splits into 3. The Islamic meaning, the customary meaning, linguistic meaning. And if you don't know, and if there's a contradiction and you don't know which one to take, then the order is the Shar'i meaning, the Islamic meaning, and then the customary meaning, i.e. of the Sahaba, and thirdly, the linguistic meaning. Okay? As for majaz, then for 2 conditions, very good. There are 2 conditions, so let me just write here. Okay. I'm just going to put one word. If you do want to put the whole sentence that the Shaykh used, you can. But the first condition, okay, here that's a shartan, meaning 2 conditions. Okay, and I put that there just to make us realize that this is 2 conditions, not 2 types, but 2 conditions. First is qarina. What does qarina mean?
Haqiqa meaning is not used.
No. No. Qarina. What does qarina mean again? Find it. What does qarina mean?
Correct proof which prevents
Good. A correct proof which prevents the haqiqi meaning being used. That's what it means by qarina. And alaqa means link, meaning there has to be a correct link between the 2 things that you're doing the majaz between. So that's qarina, is quite straightforward. And alaqa, we said this, we mentioned basically 2 types of alaqa. Okay, the first is similarity. Similarity. So, for example, we give the example of the lion, and we also give the example of the moon, that there's a characteristic or something which is similar between the 2. So, for that reason, let me just, inshallah they can see. And then the second is majaz mursal. What's this called again? If there's isti'ara, very good. Okay. Okay, isti'ara. So mushabaha means similarity. So if there is a similarity, the technical term for that is isti'ara. And Here you can write غير مشابه. It's a bit hard to write like this. And this is known as majaz mursal. Okay. Okay. And okay. And these are different types. So number one was the sabab. Okay. As-sabab. So that's the example that we gave regarding we took care of the rain. Okay. Why have we mentioned the rain? Because even though we mean plants, because it was the reason why we had to take care of them. Number two is, it's called al-musabbab. Musabbab. So it's okay. That's the same as reasoning, except we don't look at the reason, we look at the natija, the end product. So when Allah sends down from the sky provisions, we mean rain. But why have we used the word rizq? Because it's a musabbab, it's the end product of the rain. Now from that rain we have water which we can drink, and water that we can use for plants, and water that we can use for so many things. So it leads to provisions. So both of these are the same, they both do with reason, except this is the reason itself, and that is the end product. And then we had number three is ziyada. Okay, the extra word. ليس كمثله شيء. And lastly we had حذف, which وصل القرية as the village. So that's basically a summary of what we have just taken. Inshallah. Any questions? That makes sense. Qarina. Who wants to answer? What does qarina mean? Qarina is a word that means something. Qarina. A correct proof which prevents the haqiqi meaning being used. So that's what. So if you want to write the whole sentence, you can write it. I'll just write in one word, because when you summarize, try to do it at least as you can. But like I said, if you want to add more, that is totally up to you. So if you want to add an example underneath, shar'iyya, salah, meaning the act of worship. Urfiyya, dabba, referring to, even though linguistically anything on the earth, but referring to four legs. Lughawiyya, again, salah, meaning dua. You can, that's all up to you how you want to do it. But this is just one way, I think, which will help. Which one?
Last one.
So if you look, majaz, two conditions, shartan, qarina and alaqa. Alaqa means link. That's i.e. there has to be a link between the two things that you do in the majaz between. And the link is of two types. Mushabaha. Mushabaha means similarity. Okay, and if that is the case, the technical term is isti'ara. So, for example, the example of the asad, the lion, that's majaz. If you want to be more precise, it's isti'ara. It's called isti'ara. If you want to be really precise. So majaz is obviously like a big word. If you're really precise, it's isti'ara. And غير mushabaha, meaning there's no similarity. There's no similarity. And that is known as majaz mursal. Okay? And then the words underneath it, the first one is as-sabab, which is reasoning. Number two is al-musabbab, which is the end product of the reason. Like the provisions. Okay? So rain is the reason, and the end product is the provision. So you use that rain and you gain provision. And number three is ziyada, something extra, additional. And hadf is something which has been omitted or erased or removed. Yeah? Okay, alhamdulillah. Right, we're going to carry on to the next chapter, inshallah. Actually, I think there's one more issue before we do. Yeah, ask the village. So, what word has been removed? People. Ask the people of the village. Very good. No. He says, here only some types of the reality and metaphor in Usool fiqh have been mentioned due to the fact that the meaning of words is either real or metaphoric, so the need arose to make each one known and their ruling, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. There is an issue, there is one issue that we want to quickly mention before we move on to the next chapter. Is there majaz in the Quran? Is there majaz in the Quran? I'll answer it, inshallah. I pause so that you can write it down. Now, there's actually about 4 or 5 opinions. But I'm just going to mention 2 because these 2 are the main 2 opinions. The first opinion is that, yes, there is. Okay. And this is the majority of the ulama, they say yes. And the proof is, the examples that we've given, that it takes place. It takes place. The second opinion, which I want to mention, is that no, there's no majaz in the Quran. And this is the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. This is the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn al-Qayyim, his student Ibn al-Qayyim. Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti. Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti, the one who wrote the tafsir. And also Ibn al-Uthaymeen, and also Ibn al-Uthaymeen. And also Ibn al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. Okay. And their proof is that all of these terminologies, and to apply them to the Quran, this is something that actually took place after the time of the Salaf. So all these types were not known at the time of the Salaf, nor have these wordings and these terminologies been mentioned by the original scholars of Arabic language, such as Sibawayh, Khalil, and others. Rather, this is actually added on later by Ahlul Bid'ah, such as the Mu'tazila, And the reason they did this is so that they can make all of the sifat of Allah, all of the names and attributes and characteristics of Allah, they make all of them metaphors. So they say, Allah has a hand, this is a metaphor, it means something else. Okay? So they're saying that when all of these, why have these been added? This is by Ahlul Bid'ah. They added them in so that they can try to prove that, they can try to interpret and use all of the sifat of Allah as metaphors. And as Ahlul Sunnah, we believe that the attributes of Allah, we take them as they are. Okay. However, when it comes to the details and how, that we don't know. Allah has a hand. We say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a hand. How or what does a hand look like? That we don't know, because something that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have not explained. And in fact, as Imam Malik said, asking about it is a form of innovation. Okay, so if that is their dalil that this is not something known at the time of the Salaf, not even the ulama of Arabic language, what about these ayat? So some of the ayat that we mentioned, aren't they actually a majaz? And they say no. They say in fact, all of these an answer can be given. The general answer that they give is from Uslub al-Arab. It's the way the Arabs used to speak. So all of these can be given an answer other than using majaz. So for example, it might be a bit hard to explain some of these examples, because if you don't know Arabic, then it's hard to give the example. But for example, was'al al-qaryah, ask the qaryah, then those that know maybe a bit of Arabic, qaryah would have been mudaf ilayh, and the mudaf, which is ahl, that is removed. And it's known in the Arabic language that if something's well known, that sometimes the mudaf can be taken away. Okay? If you don't know Arabic, that probably went over your head. But if you do know, then mudaf. So it's known in Arabic that sometimes the thing which is being possessed, then if that is known, then the mudaf, the possessor, can be taken away. And those, if you study Arabic, you'll see that this does happen. That's just an example. I'm not going to go through every single example, every single ayah that we mentioned, but that's how they answer. So what is their answer to, okay, what about the ayat that we had mentioned? They say this is from Uslub al-Arab. This is the way the Arabs used to speak. Okay? So all of these, they're not actually metaphors, but an answer can be given from the Arabic language. And then they actually, if you go to their books such as Al-Iman by Ibn Taymiyyah, or Mukhtasar al-Sawa'iq al-Mursala, or Man'u Jawaz al-Majaz by Shanqiti, Just as the name of some books, they actually in depth, they go through each of these ayat. على كل حال, even those from Ahlul Sunnah that take the first opinion saying that there may be majaz in the Quran, then everyone agrees that this is outside of the attributes of Allah. The names and attributes of Allah, it's not in that, because that is something we don't have knowledge about, so we can't do majaz. So we don't have a dalil to show that the correct meaning, the haqiqi meaning is not there. Nor is there a link, because laysa kamithlihi shay', there is nothing like Allah. So what can Allah be similar to, for example? Okay, nothing.
So this is only for regarding the Quran, but what about hadith?
Hadith as well.
Hadith as well. There's like, for instance, just an example. Rasulullah said that will it be you get dirty if you are staying very near to the street and washing yourself?
You get dirty if you go to.
Yeah.
Oh, so they would say that's not majaz. That's an example. Prophet gave. He said that's an example, and then the Prophet said, "You will be purified from your." That's an example. That's not majaz. That's an example, not majaz. Okay, then we need to move on to the next topic. Subhanallah. Don't know if we'll finish the work. Right. The next chapter is command, al-amr. Right. So again, we're carrying on from speech, because now we are all talking about dalalat al-alfaz, different types of speech. So another type of speech is amr, commandments. Okay. Now this is from the greatest chapters in kalam, because in speech, because many of the time when we are, how do we know should we do something or not? It's a command. It's a command by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Shaykh gives a definition. The definition of a command is a statement that includes the request of an action by way of a higher authority. Okay? That basically means that a command is normally somebody higher up is telling you. Okay? So the father tells the son. A command is not son telling the father. Okay? That in Arabic wouldn't be called amr. So even if the child says to his father, can you give me that cup, or give me that cup? Yeah? Then even though linguistically, it might be called, the word is a fi'l amr, they wouldn't call that amr. They will call it maybe a type of dua, or a type of, there's another one called iltimas, and so on. I don't want to go into them because of time. But the point being is that a command normally comes from higher up. So Allah commands us, okay? Such as establish the prayer and pay the zakah, aqim as-salah wa atu zakah, which comes many times in the Quran. And then the Shaykh, he explains the definition, and I think that's quite straightforward, so we can skip his explanation of that now. Okay, now we move on to the forms of command. This is in Arabic siyahu al-amr. Siyahu, which is plural of siyah, the different forms of commands. In other words, how do you know if this word is a command? What are the different forms that you can find commandments in the Quran? That's what we are talking about now. The different forms that you will be able to find commandments in the Quran. Okay? And these are two types. These commandments, these forms are two types. So I'm not going to draw it, but if you want to, you could draw it yourself. The first type and second type. The first type would be those which are clear-cut. Those which are clear-cut. As-sarih. Sarih with a sad. Okay. And the second is غير الصريحة. So first is الصيغ الصريحة, and the second is غير الصريحة, i.e. either not direct / not clear cut. Okay. So let's go through them. In terms of those which are clear cut, then the Shaykh mentions four. The first is fi'l al-amr. Fi'l al-amr, we took this yesterday, anyone remember? A command. Okay, the word itself is a command, okay? So for example, they say here the imperative verb, i.e. commanding verb. Such as utlu ma uhiya ilayka min al-kitab. Recite. So recite is a command, so recite. Read, stand, sit. All of these are They will come under fi'l al-amr. Okay. The second, see in English it's a lot hard to explain. The imperative verbal noun, this is called ism fi'l amr. Ism fi'l amr. Okay. So he's given the example, come to the prayer, which is hayya ala salah. Hayya is actually not a fi'l, it's actually an ism, it's a noun. It's in Arabic language it's actually a noun. However, what's the meaning of it? The meaning is a command, which means to come. Okay? So this is called ism fi'l amr, meaning it's a noun, it's classified as a noun, but the meaning is a command. So hayya, so they would say that is another form of commandment using an ism fi'l amr. If you don't know Arabic, then it's some of these words, don't worry about them too much. Basically a noun that has a meaning of a command. The third, but those which are clear cut, they're more to do with the language itself. Okay, so if you don't understand it 100%, please don't worry about it and focus on the things that are a bit more clear. So those which are not clear cut, you'll understand them ones a lot more easier, inshallah. Okay. The third is the verbal noun that is used in the place of an imperative verb, and this is basically al-masdar. Al-masdar. Anyone, okay? Al-masdar. Masdar, now. Okay? And I'll give you an example. So, this is not an ayah or something, but I'm looking at some of these examples here. And let me give you an example first, and I'll mention an ayah. If I say the word qira'ah, qira'ah means reciting or reading. Okay? It's just a name of the action, right? So in certain circumstances, Allah could say, He'll use this word, okay, but the word, even though it translates to the name of the action, the intended meaning is commanding you to do that action. So I'll give you an example, right? So Allah in Surah Baqarah, He says, فَالصِّيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ. Siyam is the name for fasting. Okay, ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ is 3 days. So when Allah talks about this, Allah is mentioning, what He means is that you have to fast for 3 days. You have to fast for 3 days. But instead of using the verb, is use something called a masdar, which is the name of the action, but the intended meaning behind it is a command. And the last and the fourth one is the present tense verb joined with a lam of imperative, which is amr. I skipped the example that Shaykh mentioned in here. The example for the third one, فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ. Darbun is a masdar. The actual command would be idrib. So it'd be fadrib الرِّقَابِ. That's how it would be. But Allah used the masdar. And as you can see in the translation, they've translated it with the meaning, which is strike or to hit. Okay. The number 4, present tense verb joined with the lam of imperative. ذَلِكَ لِتُؤْمِنُوا. Those, if you know present tense, tu'minu means you believe or you are believing. It's a present tense, okay? But because that lam in the beginning, لِتُؤْمِنُوا, okay? I don't want to talk about the noon at the end not being there, but the fact that the lam has been added to a present tense verb, then that gives a meaning of a command. That's something known in Arabic. It's called lam al-amr. It's called lamu al-amr. Yeah. So, لِذَلِكَ لِتُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ is commanding you to believe in Allah and His Messenger. Okay. So these are the ones which are clear cut. Okay. And when we mean clear cut, we mean in the Arabic language. Okay. Now we're going to move on to those which are maybe not as clear. Which is called غير صريحة, which is not clear cut or indirect. Okay. So the Shaykh, he says, commands can also be used using other than the normal forms, as mentioned above, such as something being described as fard. So if you say this is fard, then that's a type of commandment. So that's number one. And what we mean by commandment, meaning it would come under the chapter of amr, chapter of commandments. Okay? Because a command is what? When a commandment is there, it shows that you have to do it. So if you say fard, that shows it has to do it. So it would come under this chapter. So if you want to learn about commandments and obligations, and not the meaning of the word wajib, not meaning of the word wajib, that's different. But in terms of, let's say, this action is wajib, and then some of the rulings regarding, or this action is fard, and a ruling regarding this fard, meaning do I have to do it straight away, or can an obligatory action be delayed till later on, then it would come under this chapter of Bab al-Amr, because it would come under commandments. Because commandments you study, do you have to do a commandment straight away? We're going to get to some of those issues. So an indirect way of it being a command is describing it as fard, that's number one, or as wajib, which is number two. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, غُسْلُ الْجُمْعَةِ وَاجِبٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُحْتَلِمٍ. Doing a ghusl on the day of Jum'ah is wajib. So that's a command. Okay, so it's command. However, correct opinion is that it's actually mustahab and not wajib, but that's due to other reasons which I don't want to mention right now. But the point being, whenever an example is given, it's not necessarily given to tell you the correct opinion in the issue. It's just giving you the examples for you to understand the issue that we are talking about. The next is obedience, ta'ah, to describe something as being ta'ah. مَنْ يُطِعِ الرَّسُولِ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهِ. Whoever obeys the messenger, then he has obeyed Allah. We commanded to obey the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another one that you could add, which the Shaykh didn't hear, is describing something as maktub, written. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ الصِّيَامِ. All the different terms that would come under that this is considered a commandment. So, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, we are commanded to fast. Okay? But obviously this is غير صريحة, because it's not any of the forms that do this, or it's not like a form in Arabic which shows directly it's a command. So that's why it comes under غير صريحة.
But even this thing, like, it's command, but it's not like command.
Yes, that's what the Shaykh, did I skip the word? Yeah, I did skip the word. Mandub. No. Mandub comes there. The Shaykh mentioned mandub. So that would also come. Obviously that command is without authority. Yeah, without the obligation now. Or praising the perpetrator, meaning praising the one doing the action. So if there's whoever does this action, he is this, or he, and so on. Allah praises this person, that shows that we are commanded to do that action. Or dispraising the one who leaves it. Okay? Or dispraising the one who leaves it. So if Allah, describes this person in a bad manner, dispraises him, then that shows that we are commanded to not do that action. Or when a reward is connected to it, Allah says, whoever does this action, then his reward is this. His reward is Jannah, his reward is this, and so on. That shows that we are commanded to do that action. And lastly, or that to leave it would be punishable. Whoever leaves this off, then his punishment is this, and that. That shows that the action is, we are commanded to not do that action. We are commanded not to do that action. Okay, so these are different forms of commandments in the Quran. So how do you know are we commanded to do this in the Quran or not? Either we have the 4 ways which are sarihah, or the other ways. How many? Did anyone number? Anyone number them as we went along? No, there's more. Fard, wajib, mandub, obedience, praising, dispraising, reward, and punishment. 8. So the Shaykh mentions 8 different ways. And then we added 1. Yes, we added maktub. So that makes it 9. Right, now another issue regarding commandments. What the wording of command necessitates. What the wording of command necessitates. Meaning, if we see a commandment, what does that mean? If we see a commandment in the Quran, what does that mean? The command, when not restricted by other factors, necessitates the obligation of what is being commanded and immediately carrying it out. The Shaykh talks about 2 issues here. The Shaykh talks about 2 issues. The first issue is that when a command comes, and it's unrestricted. Remember we mentioned this yesterday. Unrestricted meaning there's no other hadith which restricts this hadith or looks like it's contradicting or anything like that. Just this ayah by itself. Okay, what does that show us? Okay, what does that show us? We're going to talk about shortly if there's another ayah or nothing. What what does that commandment mean in that case. We're going to get to it after this issue, inshallah. But right now, a ayah by itself, there's a commandment. What does that mean? What does that mean? The Shaykh, the first thing he says, it necessitates the obligation of what is being commanded. That's the first. The first is that it means that it is an obligation for us. So a command is an obligation. And that's why the ulama normally define it as al-amr al-mutlaq yaqtadi al-wujub. An unrestricted command necessitates obligation. It necessitates obligation. So that's the first point that the Shaykh mentioned. He's going to mention the proofs for it in a second. And the second is, and immediately carrying it out. Immediately carrying out. The second is that it's obligatory upon you to do it as soon as possible. As soon as possible. That's the second point that he is talking about. And when you say doing it as soon as possible, we don't mean al-wajib al-muwassa'. Remember, wajib al-muwassa'. So if you have a time where you're able to do it, okay, then as long as you're doing it within that time, you're fine. Okay? But for example, something which is unrestricted Hajj, okay, then it's obligatory to do Hajj whenever you are able to do so. Whenever you have if you don't have the money or the physical strength, that's a different issue. But if you have the ability to do so, it's obligatory to to do the Hajj straight away. Likewise with zakah, as soon as the time for giving, the year finishes and you have to give zakah, it's obligatory to give it straight away. What are the proofs for this? The Shaykh going to mention the proofs for these individually. So he says, from the evidences that it necessitates obligation. So this usuli principle, where did we get it from? Where did the ulama get this usuli principle from? Remember we said the first madhab, which is that they extract the rulings from the adillah from the Quran. The Shaykh is going to mention in the proof. So that we know we're not blind following the Shaykh. He's taking it from the ayat and the hadith. The Shaykh, I think, is just going to mention one. Yeah, because it's a beginner's book, he's just going to mention one. So what is the proof that if a commandment comes, it means that it is an obligation? He mentions the ayah, page 30, فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. So let those beware who dissent, i.e. differ, يُخَالِفُونَ, from the Prophet's order. So this amrihi, command, order or command. Meaning those who turn away from the Prophet's command, lest fitna strike them or a painful punishment. Okay, so either they'll be afflicted with fitna and Imam Ahmad, Imam Ahmad, he said fitna in this ayah refers to shirk, or a painful punishment. Meaning, those who do not follow the commands of the Prophet ﷺ, then one of two things will happen: fitna will strike them, or they will be punished. And if you will be punished, what does that show? It shows that you have to follow the commands. So, and if you have to follow the commands, that means that it's obligatory to follow the commands. So that's how that's how they extracted that usuli principle, that whenever a command comes, it shows that it is it shows that it is, or it necessitates obligation. Hence the principle, an unrestricted command necessitates obligation. Make sense? Okay. The significance of this verse is that Allah has warned those violators of the commands of the Prophet ﷺ to beware of the fitna befalling them, which is a deviation, or that a painful punishment strike them, such as a warning, can only be for leaving something which is obligatory. All of this indicates that the general commands of the Prophet ﷺ must be acted upon. Right? We'll stop here inshallah, and I'll give you a quick 5-minute break till 1:45. We'll continue at 1:45 inshallah. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Sure.
It's not born.
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is the first issue that the Shaykh mentioned here regarding what does a command necessitate. The first is obligation. The second thing that he mentioned is that a command necessitates, in Arabic they say for, meaning it should be carried out straight away, without any delay. And similar to the first issue, both of these issues are when this commandment is unrestricted. Okay? So if I said to you stand, if I said to you stand now, then obviously that means do it now. If I say stand tomorrow, then obviously that means do it tomorrow. But it's regarding if I just say stand, unrestricted now. Does that mean do it now? Do it later? When? And the Shaykh said that it means that you have to do it straight away. What's the proof for this, that when a command comes you have to do it straight away? He says from the evidence that it is to be carried out straight away is the verse, now it's page 31, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. So race forward in doing good deeds, or hasten in doing good deeds. Because another ayah which has the word hasten in it. And فَاسْتَبِقُوا is a command in of itself. So we're commanded to race and to hasten in doing good deeds, doing it as soon as we can. Okay, and if it's a command, the first principle, a command shows that it is obligatory. So it's obligatory upon us to hasten and to race in doing good deeds. So Shaykh says, and the things that are enjoyed by the Sharia are good. And the order to race towards good is a proof of the obligation to rush to do good deeds. Okay, so subhanAllah, alhamdulillah, now that we've learned the first proof, the first principle, we're actually applying the first principle here. Which is that because it's a command to hasten and to race, and a command shows that it's obligatory, that shows that it is obligatory to race and to hasten in doing good deeds. Another proof, and the Prophet ﷺ disliked the fact that the people delayed the sacrifice and shaving of their heads on the day of Hudaybiyah until he met Salama radiallahu anha and told her what happened with the people. Summarize the story, the Prophet ﷺ had commanded the Sahaba to cut their heads, and they basically delayed. And the Prophet ﷺ found out, he became really upset. Okay, so that shows that they should have done it straight away. Also, and this third is more of a logical answer. Okay, so obviously we don't base the religion and the rulings upon our, what we think and our logic. But the Shaykh's already mentioned ayat and hadith, and now he's just backing it up and giving further strength to this opinion after mentioning adillah from the Quran and Sunnah from logic, which is also rushing to do the good deed is from being more cautious and righteous, and delaying would result in problems. Okay, so when you delay, what happens is that when you delay and now you want to do it, because you've delayed it, now you might be in a situation where you're busy and you're not able to do it. Leading to the accumulation of duties, maybe now you have so many things to do. So for example, is that during the hadith dawrah, if you missed a day or 2 or 3 and you said I'll catch up later, and now in the end you have all 5 days to catch up in one go, that's too much. That's too much to catch up in one go. But if you had just maybe missed 1 day and you caught up before the following lesson, then you're fine. Then you are fine. So it's when, and that's what happens. One of the reasons students drop out of courses is because they might end up missing a class or 2 for a legitimate reason, but then they don't hasten in catching up before the next lesson. So what happens? They miss the next lesson as well, because they think to themselves, oh, I won't understand this lesson until I understand the previous lesson, so now they have to make up 2. And then it gets to 3, then 4. Then when it gets to about 5 lessons, it's too much, and then they leave it. Okay, so likewise with obligations, which the person is then in turn unable to carry out. It may be that an obligatory act may not require to be carried out immediately due to an evidence which requires it. In such cases, it is removed from being an obligation to meaning something else, such as, that's the next issue. So, and also by the way, the previous point, if you keep delaying until death reaches you, then obviously then you will be sinful for not carrying out that which is obligatory. The next paragraph here, the Shaykh says, it may be that an obligatory act may not require to be carried out immediately due to an evidence which requires it. This is what we mentioned in the beginning, that if there is another evidence which specifies the time, then obviously we stick to the time. So if that evidence shows us that you can delay till later, then that is permissible to delay till later. So for example, making up the fasts of Ramadan. It should be done straight away in Shawwal. But we have the hadith of Aisha radhiallahu anha that because of her duties and she being busy, she wasn't able to until Sha'ban. Okay? So that shows it is permissible to delay until the following Ramadan. It's not allowed until after the next following Ramadan starts, but before that Ramadan starts, it's permissible. So now, in this scenario, if somebody turns around and he says that, isn't the usuli principle that you have to do it straight away? You say yes. However, in this situation, we have an qarina. Okay, we can use the word qarina, which is another correct proof which prevents us from sticking to the original ruling, which is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha. So this is, and this also, if, when I keep saying unrestricted, that's what I mean. That there's no other hadith or ayah which prevents us from sticking to the foundation. Okay. And then the Shaykh, he says, in such cases, i.e., in those cases where there's different qara'in, different qarinas, different proofs which may change the ruling of the amr, then it could change it. It is removed from being an obligation to meaning something else, such as. So the first thing is that something recommended, meaning a commandment, an unrestricted commandment necessitates what? It necessitates obligation. Meaning, if a command comes by itself, it means that it is obligatory to do the action. Okay. If there is a secondary hadith, then what are the other possibilities? So is it only mustahab or are there others and so on? We're going to mention them. So the first one is that it can be changed from being an obligation to being recommended mustahab or mandub, or whichever of the words that you want to use. So let's use an example. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَأَشْهِدُوا إِذَا تَبَايَعَتُمْ. When you buy and sell, have it witnessed. Okay, وَأَشْهِدُوا, that in Arabic that's a command. It's an amr, fi'al amr. So from this ayah alone, what would be the ruling of having a witness? We would say it is obligatory to have a witness when buying and selling because it's a fi'al amr. And because it's a command necessitates obligation. Okay? So that's the usul al-fiqh process that we would do to get to, from this ayah, to having a witness is obligatory. However, we know that it's not obligatory to have a witness. Every single time you buy and sell, you have to have a witness. It's not the case. Why? Let's read what the Shaykh says. The command to have the buying and selling witness is for preference, and you recommended, according to the evidence that the Prophet ﷺ bought a horse from a Bedouin and he did not have it witnessed. So why? How have we gone from being obligatory to being mustahab? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he himself, he bought a horse from a Bedouin, and when he didn't have a witness himself. The Prophet ﷺ did not have a witness when he did his buying and selling. So that shows that obligation, or that commandment, doesn't show that it's obligatory, rather it's mustahab. Okay? Rather it is recommended and it is mustahab. Okay? I'll give you another example. The previous, just because the hadith was mentioned previously, of ghusl jum'ati wajibun ala kulli muhtalim. That having a ghusl on Yawm al-Jum'ah is obligatory upon every muhtalim, meaning every mukallaf. That hadith by itself will show what the word wajib is, okay? That's obligatory. But then in another hadith, Prophet he said that you should do wudu, but ghusl is better. The ghusl is better. That shows that if you do ghusl, it's better, but if you don't, it's fine. So if you just do wudu for Jum'ah, it's fine. So that is us having a qarina, a second hadith which explains this hadith. So it changes the ruling from obligation to a recommended. Okay, number 2 is permissible. So sometimes when a command comes, it can also mean it's permissible. Okay, and this is generally in one main type. I think Sheikh's going to mention 2 actually. No. The first is often occurring after a warning or in reply to what may have been perceived as prohibited. So these are 2. The first is, you can number them, often occurring after a warning, that's number 1. And the second is, or in reply to what may be perceived as prohibited. So, what does it mean after occurring after a warning? They call it hadar. Anyone, I didn't remember mention this. Hadar or mahzur is another word for something. Mahzur. Haram. Very good. Muharram. Okay. So in other words, even though the hadar literally means a warning, mahzur is another word for something which is muharram or haram. So what it means by often occurring after a warning, after something's been made haram, after that, if a commandment comes, that command normally shows that it is permissible and it's not a command in terms of an obligation or something recommended. Let's give an example. An example of this occurring after a prohibition is the verse, وَإِذَا حَلَلْتُمْ فَاصْطَادُوا. Whilst you're in the state of ihram, you're not allowed to hunt and kill animals, right? But Allah here says, but when you come out of ihram, فَاصْطَادُوا, then hunt. Fastad is a command, then hunt, right? Is it, once you come out of ihram after doing umrah or your hajj, is it obligatory to go start hunting? No. It's permissible. Why? Because it's come after the prohibition of hunting whilst in the state of ihram. That's why the translation is very good, where he's done then, and he's done it in brackets. You may hunt. Okay, so he's done that in brackets to show that through usul al-fiqh, it shows that it's permissible, and that then hunt is not a command showing that it is obligatory. Okay. So the Shaykh, he says, the command to go hunting is one of permissibility because it is mentioned after the warning, as is deduced from the verse, غَيْرَ مُحِلِّ صَيْدِ وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمْ, hunting not being permitted while you are in a state of ihram. Okay, so that's what we just explained. An example of when it is a reply, so this is the second, if you go back to what the Shaykh said, number 2, al-ibaha, permissible, often occurring after a warning or in reply to what may be perceived as prohibited. He's going to talk about the second one now, which is a reply to something which may be perceived as prohibited. The Shaykh now, he says, and an example of when it is reply to what is perceived to be prohibited is a statement of the Prophet ﷺ, do it and there's nothing wrong. So, this carries on, in reply to the one who asked during the final Hajj about doing actions of the day of Eid in different order. So on the day of Eid, there's 3 things that you have to do. And this Sahabi asked that, can I do it in a different order? So Prophet said, do it. Okay? Do it and there's no problem. Wala haraj. Do it. That's a command, right? Okay, but is it a command to do it in a different order? Or is it just showing that it's permissible to do it in a different order? It's showing permissible. Why? Because of the scenario. The scenario is a reply to something which might have been perceived that it's not permissible to do. Hence he asked the question. Okay. This is the third time where it could be something... okay, so sorry, this is the third of when... the third meaning of a command. So the third meaning of a... First is obligation. It's mustahab. The second is permissibility. The third is a threat. So it's a command, but it's actually it's a threat. Don't do this, basically. As in a statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, اِعْمَلُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ إِنَّهُ تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Do what you like, indeed He is ever watchful over what you do. Do what you like. Does that mean, khalas, we can do whatever we want? No, but it's a threat. And you can work it out from the context. I mean, for example, the next ayah, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ إِنَّا أَعْتَرْنَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ نَارًا. So whoever wishes, then let him believe, and whoever wishes, let him disbelieve. Verily, we have prepared for the unjust a fire. I mean, do what you want, but if you did something that goes against the Sharia, you'll be thrown into the hellfire in the hereafter. So it's not permission for you to do what you want, but it's just a command used in a context to show that it is a warning. So the warning is mentioned after the command is laid down, proving that it is a threat. The fourth meaning, the command is removed from an immediate nature to one which can be implemented over time. Okay. This is not in the Arabic, he's not put a number, but this is a separate point of the Shaykh. This is the other issue of when the issue of... So this shouldn't be a number 4. This shouldn't be a number 4. This is the other issue of time. That a commandment normally shows that you have to do it straight away. But the number 4, the command is removed from immediate nature, meaning you don't have to do it straight away. to what? To doing it or being implemented over time. An example of this is making of the missed days of Ramadan, because even though it is in order to be made, the evidence indicates, and he mentions the hadith of Aisha, and I mentioned this previously. So this isn't a number 4, this is actually a point regarding the time. So what the Shaykh had done, the Shaykh first mentioned 2, and this is a translation by the way, in the Arabic it's fine, it's not number 4 in the Arabic. So what the Shaykh had done, the Shaykh mentioned the 2 benefits of command, which is obligatory, and you have to do it straight away. And then he said sometimes, when they are not unrestricted, meaning when they are restricted, then the meaning can change. So he changed the meaning of obligation, and he mentioned the 3 meanings. And now he's mentioning that it can sometimes change from being immediate to having a time frame to do it in. Okay. If the day was forbidden, Aisha would not have confirmed it. Okay. Now it's number 5, and again this is not number 5. This is a different issue. When what has been commanded cannot be completed except with it. Right. This is a principle, a very important principle regarding commands. I'll say in Arabic and then I'll translate it, which is ما لا يتم الأمر إلا به فهو واجب. Or ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. That which without a wajib cannot be completed, then that is also wajib. That which without a wajib is not actually instead of wajib, just put a command. Because we're talking about command, put that, because it will include a lot more. That which a command cannot be completed without, then it will take the same ruling as a command. So if it is a wajib, it's wajib. If it's mandub, it's mandub. So ما لا يتم الأمر إلا به, that which without the command is not completed, then it takes the same ruling as the command. It takes the same ruling as the command. Generally, this principle is used for wajib, that's why I ended up saying wajib. But I just realized the Shaykh gives an example of mandub as well, so we make it more general. That which without a command is not completed, then that is also, it takes the same ruling as a command. What does that mean? He says, so if an action that has been commanded is stopped because of something, then that thing itself becomes commanded in order to fulfill the command. And if it is recommended, then a thing by default recommended. An example of an obligation is covering someone's awrah, part of the body that must be covered. If you are prevented by doing so without certain clothes, then buying these clothes becomes an obligation also. So normally buying clothes is not obligatory, it's permissible. But let's say you don't have enough clothes to cover your awrah, then because you can't complete that obligation without buying clothes, it becomes obligatory upon you to buy clothes. So in this scenario, buying clothes is obligatory upon this person. Why? So back to the principle. That which without the command cannot be completed, then that thing takes the same ruling as a command. In this case, the wajib cannot be completed without it, so this is also wajib. Another Shaykh gives an example of something which is recommended. An example of something recommended is wearing perfume on the day of Jum'ah. If it relies on buying perfume to carry it out, then buying that perfume likewise recommended. So, putting on perfume, recommended. You don't have any perfume. So what's the ruling on buying perfume? Recommended, mustahab. This principle is part of a more general principle, and that is that the means follows the rulings of the purpose they are used for. This is an even more general principle, which is that the means, anything which allows you to fulfill the obligation, then the means takes the rulings of the objective or the purpose. So, for example, if it becomes obligatory, let's say upon a faqih, or at least one person in that area community that we talked about yesterday, let's say it's obligatory upon this person to become that scholar. Let's say it's obligatory, okay? But he can't understand all of these fiqh masail without usul al-fiqh. So what's the ruling for him studying usul al-fiqh? Wajib, fardu ayn, obligatory upon this person, okay? If it's if he could understand that issue without usul al-fiqh, like many of us, like it's obligatory for us to know how to pray, and especially the basic rulings, we don't need usul al-fiqh for us at our level to know how to pray, then it's not obligatory for us to learn usul al-fiqh in that scenario. Obviously, it's when it gets more difficult, then you need usul al-fiqh. So that's what the Shaykh is trying to say here. Now, with that, we finish the chapter of commands. Now we move on to the chapter of prohibition. We move on to the chapter of prohibition. The Shaykh, and before we start, it's important to know that every issue that we took in commands, it has an opposite in prohibition. It has an opposite in prohibition. So the definition is the exact same, except one word is going to make it the opposite and so on. So for that reason, the Shaykh might not mention all of the exact same rulings, because it's just the opposite. It's just the opposite. So he'll focus on some of the main ones that need a bit of explanation. He says the definition of prohibition, a statement which includes a request to avoid something, doing something that is from a higher authority with a specific format, that of the present tense coupled with the lam of prohibition. The actual definition is until the word with, not including the word with. That's the actual definition. A statement which includes a request to avoid doing something that is from a higher authority. Okay? And as you can see, you probably remember some of the words like higher authority we talked about. And amr mean the command comes from above. Likewise, the prohibition comes from above. We've explained this, so I'm not going to focus on it. And then where he says, with a specific format, he's now talking about the siyagh, the different formats of the different ways a prohibition can come. Okay? So he says, that of a present tense coupled with a lam of prohibition. So this is the most, this is the sarih, this is the one which is clear cut. So in Arabic, if'al, that's command, but if you put la before it, and then there's a fi'al mudari after it, that shows prohibition. La taf'al. So if I told you, don't speak, tatakallam means you are speaking, la tatakallam, do not speak. So that's what he says here. The present tense coupled with the lam of prohibition. The Shaykh gives an example. He says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا. Do not follow those who deny our revelations till the end of the ayah. And I'll mention to you some of the siyagh which are غير صريحة, which are not clear cut. I'll mention a few to you inshallah, which I think the Shaykh did not mention. The Shaykh did not mention. He just mentioned that which is clear cut, which is where a present tense is coupled with the lam of prohibition. As for those which are غير صريحة, not clear cut, then the first is describing it as haram. Describing it as haram. So for example, Allah says, حُرِّمَتَ عَلَيْكُمْ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ وَلَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ. لَحْمُ الْخِنْزِير, for example. Eating pork and pig and so on, right? Allah says, حُرِّمَت, it's made haram. So that is a prohibition for us to stay away from eating haram. Okay, and when we talked about wajib and so on, for each of them we mentioned different words, right? We said another of wajib is fard, hatam, maktub, all of this. So any of the other words can also be included here. Just because I mentioned a certain number, I'm not restricting it to this. There are many others. But obviously, if you look at the bigger books, then there's some mention about 37, some mention 41. I think I'm not going to mention all of them. So I'm just sticking to the main ones for now. These are the main ones. The majority are these, and the other ones that they mention is probably just one ayah here or one hadith there, and that's it. So you don't need to worry about them too much. The second is to describe it as something which is filthy. Something which is filthy or dirty. So for example, the Prophet said, ثَمَنُ الْكَلْبِ خَبِيثٌ, that the price of the dog is filth. Okay? So that, according to this hadith, will show that we are prohibited from buying and selling dogs. Okay? Based upon this hadith. Using the word haram or any of the synonyms for haram. And the second is describing it as something which is filthy or dirty. No. The second one, أن يوصف بالقبح, قبح. أو خبث. نعم خبث. The next is to dispraise the doer, the one doing the action. So for example, let me see the time. Okay, I'm just going to skip the examples for now for the time, okay? The next one is to mention whoever does this action, then he will be punished. So the next one is to mention a punishment for the one doing the action. So Allah will say, whoever does this action, then he will be in the hellfire. That shows that that's a prohibition from us to do that action. And the last is Allah cursing a person who does a certain action. So for example, if it said, لَعَنَ Allah, whoever, Allah curses the one who does this and that, that shows that those actions we are prohibited from doing. Okay. Sorry? No. This is extra. This is not in the book. I'm telling you. These, was it 4 or 5 points? They're not in the book. The only one mentioned in the book is that which is clear cut, where a present verb is coupled with the lam of prohibition. Okay? That's the clear cut one. As for the ones which are unclear, I added that you just add to the side.
This punishment can be mentioned about in the world or the afterlife?
Yeah. Any type of punishment. Okay. If you go to the next page 36, because the rest of the page the Shaykh just explains the definition, which is quite straightforward, inshallah. We can now talk about what the wording of prohibition necessitates. So just as we talked about with Amr, with the commandments, now we're going to discuss prohibitions. So the author says, when left unrestricted, meaning there's no other qarina, there's nothing else, okay, we've talked about this, it necessitates complete prohibition, okay, which is haram. So just as a commandment, an unrestricted commandment necessitates obligation, an unrestricted prohibition necessitates prohibition, or something like haram, tahrim, muharram, or any of the other words that you want to use. And secondly, so complete prohibition of that which is being forbidden. Secondly, and its invalidity. Meaning, if you did something in a manner which is haram, then it's not accepted. It's not valid. It is not valid. And what's the proof for this? So from the evidences that demonstrate that this is the statement of the Most High, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوا وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. And whatsoever the messenger gives you, then take it, and whatever he forbids you from, then abstain from it. Meaning it's obligatory to stay away from that. It's haram to do it. So the command is to stop at what he forbade us from, which requires that we must abstain from it. So then it turns, in turn, becomes a prohibited act. And from the evidences that show the invalidity of certain actions is the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, whoever does an action that is not in accordance with our affair, then it is rad, it is rejected. It is rejected. So anyone that does something which is haram, because haram is not from the religion, it's not something that you are legislated to do, and also bid'ah and anything else, then it is rejected, meaning it is not accepted. So this is one dalil that he uses to prove that if you were to do something which is prohibited, then it invalidates the action. It says rejected and whatever he forbade us from. So if the order of Prophet ﷺ was not followed, then it will be rejected. The principle according to the school of thought, the Hanbali, concerning those things which have been forbidden, whether they are correct or not, are as follows. The prohibition, number one, the prohibition returns back to the very thing itself, being prohibited, or its conditions, thus making it incorrect. Second, the prohibition returns back to something other than itself or its conditions, therefore not being incorrect. What this basically means is that he's explaining and going a bit more into detail regarding the issue of doing something haram in a certain action. Okay, now this is a famous issue in Usool al-Fiqh, which is known as as-salah fi dar al-maghsuba, praying in a, let's say, stolen house, or in a house that you've taken by force. Okay, let's say Muhammad Ibrahim, I've gone into his house, kicked everybody out, and I said, this is my house now. Okay, this is my house. But I have some iman, so salah time comes, I want to pray in that house. It's not permissible for me, it's haram for me to be in that house because it's not my house. But now I'm praying salah. So I'm praying in a place where I'm not allowed to pray. Is that salah accepted or is it not accepted? Okay? Now this is an issue, and this is the issue that the Shaykh is talking about. And it's a big issue in Usool fiqh, and the ulama differ. And the Shaykh mentioned one, the opinion of the Hanbali madhab, which seems to be a very strong opinion. Okay? Which is that there are two scenarios. There are two scenarios. The first is that the thing that the person is doing wrong, the haram that he is doing, the prohibition that he is committing, it returns to the action itself. Okay, it returns to the action itself. The Shaykh is going to mention a few examples and so on. Or a condition of the action, something connected to the action. The second scenario is that the thing that he's doing the thing that he's doing wrong is not going back and it's not linked to the action itself. So this house has got nothing to do with the salah, okay, in of itself, right? Because the only thing that you have to, in salah, you have to make sure is that the place that you're praying is pure, and that's fine. Okay, the condition is not that it has to be your house or anything like that. So they say that because it doesn't go back to a particular condition, and all of the other conditions are there, you have wudu, you're facing the qibla, all of that. They say because this prohibition that the person is doing, which is taking somebody else's house, that's a separate issue to his salah. Okay, the salah is one, and him stealing the house is something else. So for that reason, the salah is accepted, but he will be sinful whilst praying salah in the house because he's in the house, he's in a place where he's not allowed to be. So he'll be sinful, but the salah itself is still accepted. Okay? If the prohibition went back to him doing something wrong in the salah itself, he added an extra rak'ah, for example. Okay? We're not allowed to add something. Somebody turns around and he says, oh, I want more rewards, so I want to add an extra rak'ah. Okay? So he does dhuhr 5 rak'at. Right, then that salah is not accepted because something that's part of the salah. That is something which is part of the salah. So inshallah that scenario makes sense. And the Shaykh, he will give a couple of more examples, inshallah. So let's read what he says. Actually, instead of reading the example, let's read the principle again, so it makes more sense. Let's read the principle again, so it makes more sense. He says, so this is page 37. The principle according to the school of thought, Hanbali, concerning those things that have been forbidden, whether they are correct or not, are as follows. Number one, the prohibition returns back to the very thing itself being prohibited or its conditions, thus making it incorrect. Number two, the prohibition returns back to something other than itself or its conditions, therefore not being incorrect. An example of the first principle in worship is the prohibition on fasting on the 2 days of Eid. Okay, so on the day of Eid, are you allowed to fast? You're not allowed to fast. So this fast that you are doing, this prohibition comes back to the act itself, the action of fasting. So that will be, that salah will be, that fasting would be invalid. An example of the first principle in dealing with other people is now he gives an example of transactions, is the prohibition of selling after the second call to the Friday prayer for whoever the day of Friday is obligatory. So basically after the khutbah starts, at that time you're not allowed to buy and sell. So if somebody is buying and selling at that time, because it's something haram that he is doing, and now he's buying and selling, so this prohibition, it comes back to the buying and selling, that you're not allowed to do the transactions during this time. So for that reason, that transaction is considered invalid. And it's not a valid or accepted or a sahih. Remember, hukm wad'i, sahih type of transaction. An example of the second principle, i.e., if the prohibition goes back to something which is not to do with the action itself, in worship, so he's going to give two examples, one in worship and one in transactions. In worship is the prohibition of man wearing silk. If he covers his awrah, fulfilling one of the conditions of the prayer, but if he covers his awrah with a forbidden cloth, his prayer is invalid because the prohibition returns to the conditions of the prayer. So here, the condition is that you cover your awrah. Okay? Now if he wore the rest of his clothes were silk, then the salah would be accepted, but he'd be sinning for wearing silk, because that doesn't go back to the condition is not the whole thing, even though, you should, right? But the condition is only the part of the awrah. So because, the example he says, if he covers his awrah with a forbidden cloth, then his prayer is invalid. Because now that the prohibition of wearing silk is going back to the condition which is covering his awrah. But if it was, let's say he was silk over here, then the salah is accepted, but he is sinning. Why is it accepted? Because there's no condition that you have to cover your wrist or your forearm or anything like that. An example of the second principle when dealing with other people is a prohibition of on the sale of a fetus load, because knowledge of what you are buying is a condition and the validity of the transaction. If a fetus is sold, the transaction is not valid due to the condition of the prohibition. Due to time, I'm just going to skip over this example. The example when he says fetus, he's talking about buying and selling animals, not humans. Yeah, buying and selling animals. I'll clarify that, inshallah. So, are you allowed to sell what is in the fetus? You don't, because you don't know is it going to be a male or female, or is it going to be healthy, not healthy. You don't really know. I just want to skip over. We've understood the point, so because of time, we'll skip over this example. An example of prohibition returning to an external issue with regards to worship is wearing silk turban of a man. So this is what the Shaykh is saying. So, in the first example he gave, why was the salah invalid? Because it was covering the awrah. That went back to a condition. Wearing a turban, which is made out of silk, it's something haram, but it doesn't go back to a condition. So if he prays whilst wearing a silk turban, it does not invalidate his prayer because the prohibition does not fall back on the prayer or its condition. And then he gives another example of buying and selling, which we can also skip over. Then the Shaykh, he says, the format of prohibition sometimes can be used for other than which is forbidden when evidences shows otherwise, as in the following cases. So similar to amr, we said that the asl is that when amr is unrestricted, then it shows that it is obligatory. But then we show that if there are other qara'in, other qarinas, then the ruling can change to mandub, recommended, permissible, a threat, and so on. So likewise, is doing the same here. That if a prohibition comes, then it can mean two issues. It can move to two other rulings. The first is disliked, meaning makruh. So instead of being haram, it can be makruh. Number one, dislike. The example that is given of the one saying of the Prophet ﷺ, do not let any of you touch his private parts with his right hand when he urinates. The majority say, so like I said, we don't want to go into the fiqh issue and who said what was correct. We just want the example. So he's saying the majority of the ulama, they say that the prohibition here is for it being disliked, because his private part is a part of the body, and the wisdom of forbidding it is to keep the right hand pure. Meaning if there's najasa, then that's when it becomes haram. So the Prophet is telling you not to do that out of fear that najasa would go onto your hands. But if there's no najasa, then the wisdom behind it is no longer there. So that's why they say that this prohibition of the Prophet ﷺ is for something which is makruh, something which is disliked. And then there may be other ulama that say, no, it sticks to haram. But like I said, in Usool al-Fiqh, we only mention the fiqh issues as an example for you to understand the principle and not to discuss the fiqh issue itself. If you want to know more detail regarding this issue, we study in the books of fiqh. Number two, guidance. So when a prohibition could come, it could be a form of guidance. Such as the Prophet ﷺ saying to Mu'adh, never leave off saying after every prayer, oh Allah, help me to remember you, give thanks to you and worship you well. Allahumma inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Okay? So it's not like a prohibition, or this is something person don't leave off, meaning, keep remembering as much as you can. The person is trying to guide him. And it's just a way of speaking. The next issue, now this is not number 3. Again, this is not number 3. I don't know why the translators added number 3. This is a separate issue now regarding, we have kind of finished from commandments and prohibitions. And now are just some general principles regarding commandments and prohibitions. So, as for prohibitions separately, we finished. That chapter finished. And as for, commandments are finished. As for prohibitions, we have just finished prohibitions. And now, just to complete this chapter, some general points regarding commandments and prohibitions. So, we are talking about both of them now. He says, so now he's going to talk about when a command or prohibition comes. So for example, we said, a commandment shows that it is obligatory. Who is it obligatory upon? Is it every single person? Okay? So we know, for example, on children it's not going to be obligatory. So the section, that's what the Shaykh is going to talk about now. Who is being addressed by the legislation to implement the commands and prohibitions? The one who is being addressed for the commands and prohibition is the mukallaf. Who remembers what mukallaf means? Baligh aqil. The one who has reached puberty and the one who has he has senses, he has intellect. He is not majnoon, he is not crazy. The mukallaf, the one who has been charged to carry out all of the obligations that are applicable to him, an adult and of a sane mind. Adult is one, past puberty, and a sane mind is the second, somebody who has aql. What is excluded from our word adult is a child who is in charge with the commands and prohibitions in the same way an adult is, but is ordered to do acts of worship in order to help him get used to showing obedience to Allah, and likewise he should be prevented from sins so as to accustomize him with withholding from them. So the Shaykh is saying that even though a child does not fall into this, let's say it's not obligatory upon him to pray, and if he does do something which is haram, there's no sin upon him. But the Shaykh mentions a very important point, which is that still, even though that is the case, they shouldn't get used to that. And they should get used to doing those things which will become obligatory upon them, and staying away from those things which will become haram upon them. I'll give you an example. A common question that is mentioned to us as imams and so on. My daughter doesn't like wearing the hijab and so on. And if you look at one of the reasons why, you'll find that when she was younger, the parents had no problem with her wearing tight clothes and so on. They say she's only a child. She's only a kid, When she grows, she'll understand. But what happens is that because she is now used to those type of clothings, she'll carry on wearing them. Whereas you'll find sometimes those sisters, if you were to ask them what made you wear the hijab, one of the common answers is that when my father, when I was younger, my father always made me wear loose clothing. So when it came to the age and I had to cover myself, it was something I was used to. It wasn't something new. It was something easy. And in fact, maybe wearing tight clothes, that was something strange and something weird to me. So giving the tarbiyah to the children and sometimes being a bit stricter, even sometimes it's not always an issue of what's haram and halal. Okay? A technique, this is haram, but this is makruh, that means we can do it. It's not about that. Generally the Sahaba, makruh and haram was like one thing to them. And mustahab and wajib was one thing to them. It just came under, the Prophet told us to do it, so we do it. And the Prophet told us not to do it, so we don't do it. Whether it's makruh or this, they didn't get into all of that. And that's why their understanding of the religion and their level and the station was a lot higher than ours. That they would do a sunnah because it was sunnah, and we leave off the sunnah because we say it's just a sunnah. What is excluded from the next chapter, the next paragraph? And what is excluded from our word sane is an insane person, as he is not charged with commands and prohibitions, but is prevented from such actions that may be a transgression against others or a perversion. And even if he does an action from those things that have been commanded, it would not be deemed correct simply because he did not intend by it to comply with the command in the first place. So at the end the Shaykh is saying that even if a person who does not have intellect, he ends up doing an act of worship, it's not accepted because the intention is not there. Because the intention is a condition, but it's not there. But originally he's not commanded to do it. It's not obligatory upon him to do it anyway. So if he does go and he copies people doing salah, then he's not going to get rewarded because there's no intention. Okay? And if people are partially sane and so on, then they will be dealt according to their level. So if he was, for example, a common question is nowadays a lot of children are autistic. A lot of children are autistic. Does that come under this or not? So we would say to that person that autism has different levels. Sometimes autism is very minor. I know somebody is that it's very minor. He's still going to school. He's passing all the exams. He's doing everything, and just maybe a few actions that he does, we may consider them to be a bit weird or annoying. We may consider them, like that. But that's fine. He understands everything and he's doing everything. So for that person, it's obligatory for him to pray and so on. But if he gets to a very extreme level where it's similar to a person who is majnoon, then obviously he will come under the ruling of majnoon. So it does depend on the person, and that's why you won't give a general ruling on that. So if a person is sane, then it's obligatory. If he comes under insane, then it is not obligatory upon him. And as for those issues which are in between, that it depends on the issue, and you can't give a general answer. And sometimes you may even have to consult maybe specialists, doctors, and so on, to know, how severe is that illness of that person. This is not. What time Salah? When's the Azan? 1 minute. Let me see if should I finish the point or. Okay, we'll stop here inshallah. We'll continue straight after Maghrib inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.